It is a real pleasure to be back here at Gartner. I wanted to introduce Jamie Popkin, who is here to help me out in case I need some help from the old Gartner folks. I'm going to first introduce myself. I'm Alexander Pasik. I am CIO at IEEE. Letting you know a little bit about where I'm coming from. I started out at Gartner many years ago. I was at Gartner in the early to mid-90s. In advanced technologies, then went over to Wall Street at Lazard Frères, where I was running technology equities, then went to Ernst & Young as a partner running an incubator of tech startups. So my whole previous career really was about how do you leverage technologies to improve business models, whether I was advising CIOs or others in the C-suite while at Gartner, if I was advising investors about how to leverage their investments on those same areas, or actually advising technology startups about how to do this as well. But it was only, 7 years ago that I decided that it was probably time to put my money where my mouth was and say, if I've been telling these guys what to do all this time, maybe I should actually try and do it. And so I spent a couple of years as CIO of the Guggenheim, and then went over as CIO of IEEE. And just a show of hands, please. How many of you know what IEEE is? Okay, almost everybody, okay? But a lot of people who even think they know what IEEE is, may really not know what IEEE is. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on who we are. Okay, we are a publishing company, okay? We publish about a third of all the technical journals, the academic journals in engineering and technology. We are also a conference company. Sounds familiar. Publishing and conferences. Okay. And we sponsor or co-sponsor well over 1,000 conferences worldwide each year. At any given day, you've got at least 3 IEEE conferences going on somewhere in the world. We are also a professional organization with over 400,000 members in 190 countries. And if you're a member of IEEE, you might be a member of IEEE and a member of one of our societies. We have 38 different societies, including the Computer Society, which in itself has over 80,000 members. And we have Communication Society and Power and Energy and Photonics and all these others that I can't even list, all right? And finally, what we're probably most well known for is this last bullet down here, is that we are a leading developer of international standards, including the standards that we're all using every day, like IEEE 802.3, which is Ethernet, okay, and IEEE 802.11, which is wireless networking, okay, which of course everyone knows as Wi-Fi and nobody knows as IEEE 802.11. But what can you do? Okay, so that's IEEE. And if we take a look at IEEE's internal structure, and we look at where this innovation group that I'm going to be talking about lands, it'll give you some perspective of what's going on here. I've sort of divided IEEE into 2 basic areas. The lines of business, your publishing and events and members and standards and education. And then we have all of the support services, which I gather many of you are in IT, okay, so there we are, IT and the support services, along with finance, legal, et cetera, okay? And how have I chosen to organize IT? I don't know how many of you have similar organizations, but basically we have development, we have project management, governance, infrastructure. And then, when I first joined, I had several colleagues over at Google. And my colleagues at Google kept on talking to me about Google's 20% time and how, this really was very cool and it led to all these great innovations that people just do on their own. And then suddenly they bubble up and they become big successes. Things like Gmail itself was a 20% time project, okay? And now I believe it is by far the largest email system in terms of number of users in the world. And it was a 20% time project. So I tried to encourage the IT department to look at, see if they could allocate some portion, whether it was 20% or 10% or whatever, of their time to doing something else, to try and think out of the box, to do something different. And we tried that for about a year, and it didn't really work. And at first, I had blamed that on, we're all just too busy. There's so much stuff going on. Who has the time? So then, in the second year that I was there, I said, well, we got to do something else. So maybe what we can do is try to create a cross-departmental innovation team. And I actually brought in an innovation consultant, and we got members from IT, finance, and marketing. Okay? And we got them together, and we got the heads of those departments to nominate who should be part of this team. And then they got together with the innovation consultants. They tried out different things about how to foster an innovative environment. And everyone was just gung-ho about it for as long as the consultant was there. And then the consultant's tenure finished, and we said, okay, he said, now you're ready to go. And he left. And nothing happened. So I thought about it again. And I remember reading somewhere that there was a fundamental difference between the way the culture, the Western culture approached education versus Eastern cultures approaching education. And one of the things that I remember reading in this article somewhere was that in the Eastern cultures, we now seem to envy how well educated they are. But the approach towards education is to educate everybody to a good level. Whereas the approach to education in the West has typically been, well, we'll educate everybody to a barely acceptable level and hope that out of it will emerge these superstars. And that's why, even though if you take a look at now any sort of statistical analysis of education levels of West versus East, the East has a generally higher education level, but where are the Nobel Prizes coming from? Okay, more from the West. Because it's those few that the West seems to be encouraging instead of the overall. So then I said to myself, well, maybe this is just a different way of thinking. And I'm clearly a Western person, whether I like it or not, and whether I have certain sort of Eastern bizarre beliefs as well. But, maybe the key is that it's just innovation isn't for everybody. Maybe just certain people think that way and other people don't. And so what I decided to do was identify. At first it was just one, and now I'm working on a couple of others, individuals in the entire department, and I said, you are out of the mainstream. You are reporting directly to me, and you are only doing innovation. You're not going to have to fill out forms. You're not going to have to do any of the bureaucracy. You're not going to have a project manager. Okay? You're not going to have to document requirements. You're just going to think about what we need to do totally differently and come up with brand new ideas. And we just started this essentially at the beginning of 2013. So, after only a couple of weeks, we had a meeting, he and I, and he said, I got something for you and I want you to take a look at this. And essentially what we're going to see today is the result of this first output of the innovation effort in IT at IEEE. And he said, here's the problem statement. Now, you've all just seen that about IEEE, right? And you see that we do many different things, and we're organized by product line. He says, the problem is that customer interactions, and let's also realize right now off the bat, if you go into IEEE's hallways and you have different conversations with people and ask them, what's a customer? Depending on who you talk to, you're going to get very different answers. Okay? But because we're in IT, and we are outside the business units, we get to look at the holistic problem and say, who's the customer? Anybody who interacts with us. Anyway, in any way. Hopefully that provides us some revenue, okay? So, no, I'm not necessarily saying that vendors are customers, because we do have vendor interactions, okay? But people or institutions who interact with us are customers. And it doesn't matter whether they are members, it doesn't matter whether they are authors, it doesn't matter whether they are readers or conference presenters or conference attendees, okay? These are the people who interact with us and by their interactions result in us getting revenue. That's a customer. But the problem is that customer interactions don't effectively expose the depth and breadth of all these offerings across the lines of business. They just don't do it right now. And indeed, if you take a look at IEEE.org's homepage, certain things become very obvious. Like, for example, you have these tabs right there that correspond to our business lines. And you even have certain other tabs over at the top that stay around beyond the home page that are also about our business lines. Now, if you take a look at all these business lines, whether it's research that you want to read articles about, that's the publishing, or membership, or societies, other subscriptions to digital libraries, conferences, et cetera, this is not really, this is only the beginning of the problem. Because if you look underneath any of these, you have literally tens of thousands of websites that correspond to all these, especially in the conferences area. Every conference that we have has its own website. And it's created by volunteers who run those conferences with no consistency across the brand, across content, across ways of accessing. So you've got all of this content, an enormous amount of content, totally disorganized, but it is sort of organized by lines of business. But what it isn't is that this guy over here, he's not saying, I want to know about memberships and digital libraries and societies and conferences and standards. That's not what he's thinking. What he's thinking is, I'm trying to figure out what the power for my system on a chip design is supposed to be. And that's what IEEE is supposed to be helping me with. But I don't see that here. Where do I go? And so we said, okay, we need some sort of a horizontal view across everything. Something that is dynamically aligned with what the customer needs at that moment. Now, I remember at an earlier talk I saw this week, I was at a talk by, I believe it was Carl Schachter, who's VP of Google Enterprise. And he was talking about how one of the emerging trends we're seeing across many of the offerings, not just Google, but across all these offerings out there, was this idea of contextual information. Something that is in the context of what you're currently doing. Okay? And so we said, we've got to be able to bring the right information to this guy in the context of what he's currently doing. And what we don't want is to create yet another website. Another one. So it'll be 40,621st website. And now go there instead. Okay? That's not going to do it. Don't make the customer work. Make the customer be able to find exactly what he needs whenever he's thinking about it. So we've got to get into the customer's head. How are we going to get into the customer's head and know what he's thinking about before he even says so? This is, let's say, in contrast to, let's say, doing something like Google did, where you put up a nice empty screen with one little search box and say, put anything you want in there and I'll find it for you. Great, huge, incredibly important. But that still presupposes that you can articulate what you want and what you're looking for. And you may not be able to do that yet, because Google doesn't yet know what you're thinking. Have I gotten you interested? Okay. So here's the idea. What we wanted to do is somehow know what he's thinking so that when he's thinking about that, he sees only the research articles that are relevant to what he's looking for, the societies and subscriptions that are relevant to what he's thinking about, the conferences that are upcoming on what he's thinking about, okay? Continuing education standards, and even the journalism in our IEEE spectrum, the articles that might be what he's thinking about. How are we going to do this? And so I'm sitting there in my office listening to this guy pitch to me about this, and I'm probably thinking, maybe even a little more nervous and excited than you might be right now. Like, where is this going? Okay, so, and he's not there yet. He's not even giving me the problem. He's not even giving me the solution yet. He's going to lay on the problem even thicker. He's going to tell me something I already know. Okay? Here's the problem. All those multitudes and thousands of websites, they are all administered by different people. And not only different people with very different levels of expertise. We've got websites administered by students. In a student chapter of IEEE in this region, in that location, who knows? And because that person got elected to be the student chapter president, he puts up a website. And then we've got, the big websites that we in our IT group manage, like our homepage, like our digital libraries, like Spectrum, the magazine, et cetera, the online magazine, et cetera. And of course, not only they're administered all over the place, but how many CMSs do we use? I don't know. There's no way I could know. Countless. We tried to get at least a hold of the ones that anybody who comes to the IT group and says, help us put a website together, we've limited down to a choice of now 4 CMSs. That's as small as we could get. Okay? And even if we solved all those problems, who's going to do it? Who is going to be able to go out in terms of technical and marketing resources to somehow change these things so that it works better, so that it reads the people's minds? So we are now going to introduce what we are currently calling, and my legal department has told me to say this is a working name only. Okay, all right. We're calling it IEEE Contextive. Okay, so yes, I would have liked to do a demo, but I don't think we were set up to do the demo here. So I instead will have to describe to you what you're seeing in this screenshot and then talk a little bit about it. So what you're looking at here is a web page from IEEE Spectrum magazine. Okay, so let's say you are someone who is reading Spectrum magazine, and you particularly are interested in these underwater robots that they know where they're going. That's the headline. Okay? So this page comes up, and you start reading it. Now, if this page had been prepared the way it was prepared prior to Contextive, you would read it, and it would just look like any other web page. No problem. However, by augmenting the Spectrum site with Contextive, which, by the way, if you go to the Spectrum site, you won't see this yet because we haven't put it on Spectrum yet. Okay? But by doing that, then when the page loads, any term that is relevant to what you're reading about and part of our thesaurus becomes highlighted. Do I have a little laser thing on this, by the way? Do I? Do we know? Okay, well, I'll point to it here then. So you'll notice AUV. Right? Everyone see AUV? So AUV is in our thesaurus, and we know that if this person is reading this page, then he's probably interested in autonomous underwater vehicles. And so therefore, AUVs gets highlighted, along with any other terms that are relevant to this page from our thesaurus. And then, when the user hovers over AUV, he gets the Contextive pop-up, which shows, with tabs for conferences, society, subscriptions, research, education, all the IEEE content that is relevant to AUVs. So essentially, are we reading his mind? Sort of, because this person may not even have known that he wants to search for AUVs, not enough to go to Google and type it in. But because he's looking at this page, we understand that he's interested in this subject. And because he's interested in this subject, we can highlight the terms that we know about and we have content about on this subject, and drive traffic to the sites that generate revenue. Okay? So we do this without introducing another website, but simply by introducing this Contextive technology into existing websites. So, Contextive is contextual. That is, it is positioned as relevant to existing content. All right? We are not building another website. Furthermore, it leverages existing investments. What do I mean by this? We have search engines that search thoroughly through our digital library, through our conference database, through our societies and subscriptions catalog. We have all these search engines already. We did not have to rebuild any of that for Contextive. So it just simply plugs and plays into existing technologies. It has an extraordinarily simple technical implementation. In order to get Contextive to work, you just have to paste about a dozen lines of JavaScript code into your template for your website. That's it. So therefore, all those tens of thousands of websites that we have, we could successfully run, when we're ready to do so, a marketing campaign, an internal marketing campaign to say, all right, you guys, here's your lines of JavaScript, paste it into your template, and it'll just work. Now, it just works because of all the effort we've done on the back end. And that back end not only is scalable, incredibly fast, and able to do this on all the websites that we want with no additional changes. But in addition, it now provides an ability for us to collect a lot more data. Anytime a page loads that someone is looking at, even if that person doesn't even hover or move at all, if a page loads, we know that a page loads that had these terms on it that are terms of interest. Furthermore, if someone hovers over something, we know that not only these terms were of interest, but this particular term was of specific interest. And then if there's click-throughs, we know that as well. So we start to accumulate lots of data to understand what users are interested in and how interested in those things they are. And we have a patent application pending for this process. What does that mean? Now, I remember when I was a partner at Ernst & Young helping tech startups, whenever a tech startup would come to me with a business plan that said, oh, and we have a patent application pending, I'd say, I'm not interested. Okay? Because for me, a patent, no big deal. For me, it's all about execution. But there are people who wanted us to get a patent, who thought that it was a good idea, and we talked to some patent attorneys, and they thought it was a good idea also, and so we did it. How much time did it take for us to do this? We literally took only 1 week out of our schedules to do all the patent work with the attorneys. So, let me tell you what is patented, or is applied for the patent. Okay, because it's not the search technology, because any search technology is a plug and play. Okay? This is the idea. You have three things we're talking about. A concept graph. Now, a concept graph we call, in IEEE, that's a thesaurus. You know, it's a set of terms with relationships among the terms. But it can be anything. It could be, it doesn't even have to be text. It could be images that you are searching through. Because we don't care about how good your image search technology is, because that's just a plugin. You provide that. Okay? So, you have a concept graph, you have a set of search spaces that are federated. And you have content, be they web pages or anything else. And what this technology does is it says, if you give me a concept graph and you give me a set of search spaces, then when your users access content, we will analyze that content for relevance to the concepts in the concept graph, annotate the content accordingly, and then point via the hover boxes to the search spaces that have additional information on that subject matter. So that's, in a nutshell, how the whole thing works. Now, when we implemented the back end of this thing, we had certain criteria. We don't know who the webmasters are. They could be quite inexperienced. And so therefore it had to be incredibly easy for a webmaster to put this on his website. It had to be loosely coupled with existing infrastructure. I needed to be able to easily just put in, these are my search engines, this is my thesaurus, go. It had to be offered as a software as a service. Fully cloud-enabled, fully scalable, and fully independent of the implementing organization's infrastructure. It had to be browser independent. This has to work no matter what the end user is browsing on, and it does. And it had to be incredibly fast. Now, I wish I did have the demo here. I can't, but if anybody here wants to see it, you can make an appointment with me for any time today, and I'll meet with you, and I'll show you how it works. Okay, and I'll show you live how it works. By the time your page loads, it's done. Okay, there is no lag. There is no ability, there is no impact on the time that it takes to load a page for this to work. I tell you how, but then someone would have to shoot you. Okay. Now, we have talked about the data collection. So then, once we've collected all these data, further opportunities for revenue with user interactions that are stored, made available. Analysts can look at this and say, oh, these are the terms that are increasing and trending upward, trending downward, et cetera, et cetera. This could have significant value to the investment community. So we're looking into ways of monetizing the data that we get. Okay, fine. So then we actually went live. And we went live on one IEEE website. And we particularly chose this website because it has a lot of engineering content, but low traffic. We didn't want to just go live on our big stuff first. We want to make sure that everything that I'm claiming actually was true. Okay? And so we went on a site which is the IEEE Global History Network. It doesn't have a lot of traffic. It's this website that has all the history of engineering going back hundreds of years, or however long it is. And we put it on the site, and we started to realize that there were some things that weren't exactly what we wanted it to be. Everything works fine. But what did we find? We found that the approach of look at the thesaurus, find terms on the page that match the thesaurus, highlight them, and point to the search engine results of searching for that term, was not particularly resulting in a good user experience because there were many terms that were too general. And so let me give an example. Suppose your term was architecture, and you are suddenly looking at a page, and this particular page happens to be an article on Frank Lloyd Wright. And it mentions architecture, and suddenly it highlights it, and I hover over it, and it points to me on all these articles in IEEE journals about systems architecture. That's not cool. Not the experience we wanted. And thus, we have developed an additional layer of technology, which we'll call, we don't have a name for it yet, but we'll call it our proprietary relevance intelligence technology. Okay? And what this does is actually looks at the page you're looking at, understands what's it about, and will only highlight terms from the thesaurus if those terms have content that is relevant to this content of this page. That was a much more difficult thing to do. But we are now in beta on that, and it's looking very nice. So again, here's just as a reminder, this is the relevance technology that we're developing, and this is just another example of a typical box, a little larger for you to see, where the highlighted term was image processing. It gives you a brief definition of what it is. This person has selected research, and right there are links to research articles in our digital library, where you can go directly to look at the abstract or download the PDF, assuming you are behind the paywall and have the rights to that PDF. Okay? Furthermore, because our thesaurus is a concept graph with related terms, down here it says you may also be interested in these related topics. You click on these, and the whole box refreshes to be based on those terms instead. Okay. So, as if that weren't enough, what did we say? We said, hey, wait a second. That's fine, but we have to put it on all these IEEE websites. But what if we don't want it to just be on IEEE websites? Suppose we want it to be on any website that you happen to be at and drive traffic to IEEE. Well, we'd have to go and start making deals with the New York Times and with CNN and with Gartner and with all these different people and tell them, can you put our 12 lines of JavaScript on your website too? Yeah, I don't think that was going to happen, especially if we wanted it to be on, let's say, our competitors' websites. So what did we do instead? We developed a browser plugin. You put this into you now can go to IEEE customers, members, whoever, and say, hey, look, you like IEEE, you want to know about stuff that we do, install the plugin. You install the plugin, and this works anywhere. So here I am on the New York Times technology page, and I see cloud computing. It gets highlighted. I hover on the New York Times page, and what do I see? An IEEE cloud computing box. We knew what the guy was thinking. He's looking at this page on the New York Times. He's interested in cloud computing. Let's get him to IEEE about cloud computing. And this browser extension, although we have not released it as a product yet, it is working, and I can demo it for you. I really like it. I have it permanently installed on my browser. Okay, so now what? One more thing. The one more thing. So as if we didn't do enough already. I mean, now we can basically get people to put this in their browser and get IEEE experience anywhere they go. So we're going to do the one more thing. And what's the one more thing? Licensing the Contextive technology. We have built Contextive to be fully multi-tenant. Okay? What does that mean? That means all we have to do is say a different thesaurus and a different set of search engines, and it will just work. And we have gamed up examples with things like maybe doing it for ESPN, And now you like sports, you plug in the ESPN plugin, and now when you're on the Yankees website, you get pop-ups for ESPN, driving traffic over to the ESPN sites. Okay? Fully multi-tenant, any number of thesauri, any number of federated search engines. And if you are in any business that deals with publishing content, that you want to get people to come to your content as opposed to someone else's, now you have a solution. So, with that, I'll put up my conclusions. My conclusions, of course, are that Contextive is designed to deliver very relevant content to, initially for IEEE, targeting all of our major channels, no matter where you are. By putting the browser extension in place, it expanded it not only to the sites that we control, but to any sites, anywhere, as long as the user chooses to put it on. We can collect all these data and monetize those as well. And the last ... which I was told by my legal department not to put it in writing. Okay. It can be used by any other company who wants to license it from us. So, there we are, and I have only gone for half an hour, so...
Let's take questions. Let me see if I can get the network going.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I don't have the plugin on this machine, but I can certainly show it to you on the site that we have it installed on. By the way, can everyone hear?
Can you guys hear me? Okay. What you've done here, what you guys are doing, presents a fundamentally new business model for IEEE, which is in terms of how you leverage innovation. Couple of challenges. The question of latency, which I think you're starting to see as you start to do your testing, even though you've made some. Taking that into account with some of the basic design. But then there's a question of scale. Once this starts to roll out, is IEEE going to be in the cloud infrastructure business to make this run, or are you going to start proactively planning in terms of what those requirements are going to be? Because if you build it multi-tenant, then you've got to scale to multi-tenant. So what's your comment on that?
It is built multi-tenant. It is scalable multi-tenant. It is not on our infrastructure.
Okay. Whose?
We are not in the infrastructure business. There are plenty of other organizations that are much better at that than we are.
Okay, I'll be self-serving. Can you comment on whose infrastructure that you're planning to roll out?
I will tell you that we have versions of this working on both Google infrastructure and Amazon infrastructure.
Okay, fair enough.
But I am not going to comment on where we're going to land.
Okay, that's a follow-up. That's an offline question.
Mm-hmm.
Access.
Okay, so here we are. Let's see. Now, you have to pardon me because I can barely see. How do I get it to show what's on this screen over there? Do we know how to do that? I'm not seeing it on the big screen. And you have to give me my reading glasses. Yes. Okay. I would like to say appropriately, but I'm not really sure I can say that in all honesty. Okay? I would say, we did this. This is the first, when we filed this patent application, it was the first application ever filed by IEEE. Okay, IEEE members and professionals throughout the world who are not part of the company file patents every day. Okay, but in terms of an IEEE patent, this was the first one. He and I are the co-inventors. Did I arrange for some sort of token financial reward? Yes. And it wasn't so token. It was a nice reward. All right? But that's not the real reward. The real reward is going to come, I believe, when we can demonstrate that this indeed represents, as was mentioned earlier, a whole new business line for IEEE. And it is my expectation that when we deliver that type of success, then the role for innovation will dramatically change, and he's in on the ground floor. So I think that the rewards are more to come than the initial sort of token rewards that we're dealing with. Yes?
So clearly it's not just a minus.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. How many of these ideas does innovation guy have to come up with on a daily basis? Like, I can imagine taking the innovation guy's job, sitting there for a year working butt off trying to come up with a brilliant idea, not coming up with
Yeah.
That's the reality of innovation, right?
Well,
How does this work? How do you know how you're going to justify? You said you're thinking about bringing extra people on to do this.
see, I think that the reality of innovation is that there are people who are amenable to it, and there are people who are not. And the people who are amenable to it, they deliver a lot more than what you just said.
Well, I
So,
hope-
for
I hope
example,
so.
this particular individual, as soon as we handed off to the development team to put together from his prototype, he was already on to the next one. And the next one was done, and now he's already on to the third one. And we're talking about this thing started just in January. It's just the way some people think. Now, I would say, and here I'm going to take a little bit of credit myself, that I'm very good at recognizing this. And the reason why I'm very good at recognizing this, and you can ask Jamie if you'd like, is that 20 or 30 years ago, I was very good at it. Okay? Now, I wouldn't do that now, because this is something that changes all the time. Okay? Now, I'm not like that. But I remember what it was to be like that. And it helps me recognize. And so it's not just helping me recognize one individual. I have recognized at least 2 or 3 other individuals who I would look to see if I can liberate them or replace them and get them involved in this as well.
I'd like to comment to that as well. And yes, he is very good at that. Jamie and I can both attest to that. Is that I think in this case, what's really beyond just interesting about it is that it started with a very simple business problem. And we're seeing in the role of innovation, a lot of CIOs that we work with, is that they are fostering innovation by, in fact, coming up with a very simple business problem of which there's not an easy solve. And the innovators are approaching that. So this is an immediate payoff to a strategic business problem that was clearly articulated, and the right solution emerged without any constraints around it. The question I think you're also asking is, how do you foster a general culture of innovation where there may not be a clear business problem stated as clearly as this was? And I think it's a balance, and it also depends on the nature of the organization. At least that's what we're seeing.
Let me also give some very concrete advice about how to do something like this. In the role of CIO or in any sort of IT senior management role, for as long as the industry's been around, one of the critical points that you're always asking yourself is buy versus build. Right? Whenever you're looking at solving some problem, you say, do I buy something to solve it, or do I have to build it myself? And my view is that this whole buy versus build question needs to be reassessed in that, A, a vast majority of the time, you've got to go with buy. The professionals out there are building it already for you. And when you go around thinking, oh, my stuff is unique, 90% of the time, it's not unique. Someone else is already doing it. Someone else is doing it very well. Go out and find out who's doing it and buy it. It'll save you an enormous amount of money, not just up front, but in terms of now having a professional organization behind this that's going to keep it up to date and keep on evolving it for you, and you don't have to. Okay? But then there's that sliver of time that you decide you have to build. And when those times happen, and you say, I have to build, the immediate question you have to ask yourself is, why do I have to build this? I have to build it because I searched and searched and searched, and there is no buy solution. And if there is no buy solution, but you need it, I guarantee you someone else needs it too. And therefore, the biggest piece of advice I have here out of this whole innovation effort is if you decide you have to build anything, think multi-tenant, think marketing. There's probably a market for this thing you have to build, because if there were products out there already, you wouldn't be building it. And if you think, oh no, this is only applicable to me, then I plead with you to pull yourself out, think abstractly, and say, what is it that's very specific to me, but is there something broader that's broadly applicable or even narrowly applicable but to an interesting niche market? This is the opportunity that innovation in IT can give an organization beyond solving a problem for this organization. It puts you into the revenue generating mode. It says, we can deliver something that is valuable to us, short term, that we don't have to justify with revenue because we need it, but which, if we build it right, we ought to be able to build a business model around it to generate revenue. And by the way, when I first joined IEEE, I'm talking about within the first month, and I was invited to the board meeting, and I go to the board meeting, and our board meeting is not a meeting, it's a week of meetings, of boards and sub-boards and committees, and it goes on and on and on. And seeing that it was my first one, many of these sub-boards and committees invited me, the new CIO, to come and talk and tell us what you're going to do for us. How many of you know what you're going to do for your company in your first month of the job? Okay? You all know. When you take a new job, first 6 months, you're bluffing. All right? And if you're not, you're lying. Okay? All right? You're bluffing. That's what you have to do until you figure out what's going on. Okay? So I'm there at the board meeting, and I know I have to bluff. Okay? And so I had to keep it very general, very broad, and I don't really like bluffing. So I had to keep it general and broad. So what did I do? I said things like this. I said, this is what I want to do. I want to make sure that we start buying versus building. I want to make sure that if we build for multi-tenancy. And if we build something, it's because there's a market for it outside, and I want to turn IT into a revenue center. And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. Okay? But here we are, only 3 years later, and that's what we're going to do. Any other questions?
Right here. Sorry. Did you already have a prototype team, or did you create that out of this innovation group? And if there wasn't not
one guy.
Okay.
He is the innovator. He is the prototyper.
Okay.
Okay. That's what he does.
So how have you set up your development shop going forward so that you all can quickly take action on ideas 2, 3, 4, and beyond?
Well, first of all, we have to realize that still probably a good 90 or more % of the development work we do isn't on these innovation efforts. Okay? It's on keeping the business running, addressing the business requirements for new features, new functions on existing systems, et cetera, et cetera. And that continues to work as it worked before. We do need to understand that we need to now sort of bifurcate and say, yes, there's the traditional way of doing things that is tried and true and we know works, but it doesn't work for the innovation stuff. You have to be able to develop from a prototype quickly without going through all of the requirements gathering and details, et cetera, that are typically involved in your other projects. Now, we have an advantage, okay? And that is we're isolated. And so when we do innovation projects, typically they're not really involving the other business units. They're not really based on other business unit requirements. It's based on ideas that we're just coming up with. So we can be quicker about it. We don't have to get the consensus approvals, all the people chiming in saying, oh, yes, we should do this. It's such a tiny piece of the budget versus everything else we're doing that it kind of just, gets done under the radar. Yeah.
Alex, one question that's been coming up in my one-on-ones this week a lot around business analytics and data management kind of issues where the organization, the silos within the organization, one, sort of prevent people from even seeing sometimes that there's a problem because they're not looking at it from an enterprise basis. They say things are, I don't need enterprise MDM. Things are fine in my silo. Why should I bother? And if you don't have, top-down leadership saying, well, on an enterprise basis, we do need this for the business, then the silos continue to operate. I'm just wondering, how did the silos react? Clearly, organizationally, there are still silos in the way the business operates. You've done something that's great for everyone because you've made all of this content accessible, but the organization actually hasn't necessarily changed by it, and you've done a very clever way of bridging the silos, but the silos still exist. Can you comment on that as
Sure.
part of the innovation process?
I'll give you the good news and the bad news. Okay, the good news was that this particular project, Contextive, was such an obvious slam dunk win that nobody said, wait a second, what does this mean to me, or why, et cetera, et cetera. It was just, even the people who systematically just try to get in the way of IT every chance they get, and we have our share of those, okay? They just said, wow. That was all they could say. That's the good news. The bad news is that this wasn't our only result of innovation. Right after this, we then did another one. And I remember when we finished the prototype for the other one, I looked at it first, and I looked at Tom, who was the co-author here, who was our innovation guy, and I said, this looks really great, but this isn't going to be the, jump up and cheer. This is going to piss off a lot of people. And so then we showed it to our IT ad hoc volunteer governing committee, a couple of volunteers, showed it to them. And they were like, wow, this is even better than Contextive. And I said, yeah, I agree, but this one is not going to be one that people are just going to jump up and down and be excited about. This is going to create fights. That meeting with my volunteer subcommittee happened last June. We are now in October, and we are in the middle of a flaming hot war over this second innovation project. No result yet, so I have nothing to report. Okay, but yeah, the silos are there, and if the innovation, steps on some toes, there's problems.
So I have a question here. When you release the plugin, how much time will it take for organizations who are trying to implement this on their websites or a group of websites to create the thesaurus? Any ballpark estimate?
Okay. So you're saying, first of all, I'm trying to clarify your question because the plugin is a totally separate issue than implementing it for another company. Okay. The plugin is, once it's done, the beta version is there, and we just need to do some polishing. It's there, and making it work for a different company's implementation of Contextive is trivial. It's just filling in a different URL, okay, a couple of places. That's it. So that's not the problem. The problem is, who are the ideal customers for licensing this technology? In many cases, organizations have such thesauri. Indeed, I can go to Gartner and go to their IT glossary page. There it is. Okay? So you've got different organizations that already have it. Let me give you another example. Suppose you went to a financial institution, and the thesaurus that they want to do is just the list of ticker symbols. That's it. It's readily available. Okay? And by the way, there's an example. When I talked about how in IEEE's case we had to develop this proprietary relevance intelligence technology, that's important for a domain like IEEE that has ambiguous terms. But the vanilla version that's already running is perfectly good to run in many domains as is without waiting for the finishing of the relevance technology. And I'll give you the financial one for an example. So suppose you are, my old company, Lazard Frere, okay? And you decide to license this technology from IEEE, and you take all the ticker symbols as your thesaurus, and you have your search engines be, what do the Lazard sell-side analysts say about companies, sell-side reports? What does the Lazard Asset Management, buy-side stuff say about it? What is M&A activity on these things? What does PR Newswire say about it? Because your search engines don't have to be proprietary. They can be public also. Okay? And then all we'd have to do is fill in the URLs of the search engines, get the list of ticker symbols, and perhaps a process to make sure they are updated appropriately, and it would work with no customization whatsoever. So it's that easy. Now, if you're in a domain that requires this relevance intelligence, it also does not mean any additional work from the customer, but it does mean some pre-work that we would have to do with the customer data, because we look at the customer data and we analyze it to create our relevance intelligence. So for example, one of the things that I'm going to be asking Jamie and others afterwards is to let us suck all of the Gartner data for a brief period of time so that we can create a really nice demo for you guys.
Last question from me, Alex. Again, great stuff. And so as an example, when we all, back in the days working together, did Ratings Direct for Standard & Poor's, which was the first fixed income research delivery portal. Again, great fit to that kind of adding value to the information being delivered. But from a Microsoft perspective, we're always getting the question of form factor and platform. And as you go to a multi-tenant model and you're rolling this thing out, how do you preserve user experience across platform and form factor, considering that in some ways you're adding some complexity to the user experience, but you're doing it in context and providing them with things they can use. But as the screen gets smaller, how do you maintain that user experience?
Okay. So, I'm so glad you asked that, because I would have included that in the presentation, and it totally slipped my mind. Okay? So here it is. First of all, we have already designed the alternative form factors for the user experience for both phones and tablets in terms of what they would look like. Okay? The issue, and we have disabled them, because there are certain things that we want to tweak and fix before we release it. Okay, so, but importantly, it's important to note that not only did we design this multi-tenant so that it has different thesauri and work with different search engines, but we also completely abstracted out the user experience piece as a plug-and-play component. So therefore, you plug in how we want the user experience to look on a phone, it's all the same back end. It's just the user experience piece that changes. Now, that's fine if you are dealing with websites that you control and you're putting in the code. The other problem that we're facing is that current technology doesn't allow you, in most cases, to do plugins to browsers on these devices. But we do believe that that's going to change over time, and we do have a way around it. Okay, first of all, you can already, I just did a little search yesterday, and I found on the Apple App Store something called Virtual Chrome, which is not a Google product, I don't believe, but it's actually a replica of the desktop Chrome experience on iPads and iPhones, which allows for extensions. Okay, so therefore we could do something like that now. But, and if it doesn't evolve quick enough, we could always just replace the browser. Instead of having a plugin, have a IEEE browser, or a Lazard browser, or a Gartner browser, which is a vanilla browser, but it has this plugin already installed. So we are gaming out how we would address this, but we're also hoping that the industry keeps up as well and enables us to do it the easier way.
Microsoft, Win8 will let you, but the problem is there are 5 Win8 phones and 2 Win8 apps. So.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so any other questions? Thank you very much. And again, if you want a demo, let me know.
Great. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.